We interview YouTube and Twitter influencer Jerry Gray about his experiences riding his bike through Xinjiang, China. Well, and everywhere else in between as well. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Smith, originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Today's guest is the well-known Jerry Gray of YouTube's channel Jerry's Take on China. We're going to get his position on what it's like in Xinjiang. Welcome back to the bridge to China, Jerry.
Thank you very much. And before we start, I'd like to congratulate you on two things. One is your book, which is just out, and I believe a copy has arrived at my home, but I'm not there. I'm somewhere else, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the other is that you have actually pipped me to the post, and you have achieved my goal of reaching every single province, autonomous region, SAR, and municipality before me. I haven't been to Qinghai yet. It's the only one.
Oh, just one.
Yeah.
Shanghai's lovely. Yeah, you're going to love it.
When I get there, yeah, I'm sure I will.
It's a lot, culturally, it's a lot like Xizang. However, like it's more plains than Shark Mountain. So it's been a bit different. But, thank you. Thank you for congratulating me. I really want to make this about you, though. So
Yep. Let's go.
you recently... I was yesterday. Let me just give some context how hard this is in my eyes. I rode my bike for the first time in 3 months, and I rode from where I live to Shougang Park and back. That was like 2 hours. I'm still exhausted today. But so the people listening, you recently rode to the country of Mongolia from the south of China. Is that right?
Not exactly. We rode to the province of Inner Mongolia, the region of Inner Mongolia, not province, and we planned to ride all the way to the border, and then see what would happen with crossing. But there was a couple of issues. We got delayed several days in a couple of different places because I made the mistake of telling my local media team, who I'm friends with, what we were doing, and they said, "Oh, can we follow you and do?" And we thought this was going to be great. We'll have a media group, but it didn't work out that way. They wanted to stop and film in Changsha for several days, so we rode to Changsha. They met us there. They wanted to stop and film in Wuhan, so we rode to Wuhan and they met us there. Then Zhengzhou and then Hohhot in Inner Mongolia. And instead of having a rest day in these places, which was our original plan, we ended up spending in one case, 5 days in a city that we didn't plan to. And we really had to get back, so we never quite made the border, which was a further probably 600 kilometers from Hohhot. So we stopped in Hohhot and shipped the bikes home and then flew back. In fact, no, we didn't fly back. We caught a train. My wife and her family, her mother and father, met us in Hohhot, and we caught a train from there to Shandong to go to another place where you and I were just a couple of days apart, Chufu. We were in Chufu, I think, about 4 days before you.
It was so hot when I got to Chufu that I thought I was going to die.
It's the only place in China that I've ever been to, and I'm sorry if you're a Chufu resident listening to this, I didn't enjoy the food. Food was just very
Wow.
ordinary. Yeah, the
Well,
only place in China I've experienced that.
wow. I really don't. I've been to Chufu twice now, 3 times, but I don't really remember the food as being particularly good or bad. I just remember, like the city wall and stuff like that. Well, let's talk a little bit about Xinjiang. Wait, you're in Xinjiang. That's right. Why are you there for bicycle riding or something else?
No, no, we're coming back next month to do a bike riding event. But the bikes will be supplied to us when we get here. We're working with the production corps, Xinjiang Production Corps, and we're not working. I don't work for anybody. We're just doing this because they invited us to do this, and we're coming up here. They're going to make a few short videos, I think, and that's basically they cover my costs, and that's our payment for doing this. So this trip, we're here actually to visit a school for the blind, or actually it's a school for disabled, which has a football team for blind footballers. And we're going there tomorrow. But we've been here on our own dime, basically, having a look around. We were in Kashgar for a few days. Now we're here in a place called Shacha, which is actually a provincial city of Kashgar. Provincial? No, that's not the right word. Prefectural city of Kashgar.
Right.
So Kashgar is the main city, and this is a minor city. It's quite poor here. It's surprisingly, there's modernization, and we're in a nice hotel, as you can see. But the region has not yet fully benefited from the full poverty alleviation. I believe there's no one in poverty, but there's a lot of poor people here. And we took a walk around, and I posted a video just last night about some of the things that we've seen here. And one of the things was this, the idea that they're tearing down all the cultural relic homes and putting people into high rises, which is actually not true at all. Certainly not here. There are some high rises, but very few. They're mostly putting people into places that have 3, 4, or 5 stories at the most, and they're very classically designed. And when you compare that, and I took a walk around some of the older streets that have been condemned, and it really is a very stark difference. It's not a place I would like to have lived, particularly given the weather here. In summer it can be brutally hot, and in winter brutally cold. So we're here in perfect time. It went down to 15C, which I don't know what that is, but it went up to 30 overnight, 15 overnight and 30 in the day. So it's quite extreme changes.
Well, could you tell me a little, a lot of people say, so obviously 2020 extreme poverty, this term extreme poverty was eliminated. That's basically people are not starving to death. That's what that term actually means. So no one's starving to death.
It means they have clothing, they have a house, or they have a home, and they have an education. So these three are the main pillars. As long as you've got food to eat, you've got somewhere to live, and you can get an education and healthcare, these are the pillars of poverty. If you've got those and can afford those things, then you're not in abject poverty, but you can still be quite poor. There's a lot of people here who are obviously quite poor.
That's my question. What is, because there are poor people in China. I know because my wife, she goes out to Hebei province with a group of Buddhists sometimes, and they bring food and money to people in some of the poorest areas of that province. And it takes them a long time to get there because a lot of these people live remotely, and they're living well. They're living okay. But they could be doing a lot better, and that's what China's doing right now. The Common Prosperity Program, which runs until 2035 and 2049, depending on which one you're looking at. But could you tell us, what does poor look like in the area that you are right now?
Everyone seems to be doing okay in clothing. There's loads of restaurants, and this is not a tourist area. There probably are a few tourists, but I haven't seen a foreigner in days. Certainly not in this town in Shacha. In Kashgar you see one or two, but they're mostly Russians. You don't see too many white faces around the area. We met up with a friend of mine who's Canadian, actually by coincidence happened to be in Kashgar, so this is the only foreign face that I've seen. Happens to be a friend of mine who by coincidence was in the same city at the same time. He's an intrepid traveler as well, so the chances of us ever meeting up in the same place at the same time are very remote, but it happened. So we had a couple of meals together. That was nice. Poverty. There's a lot of people who've got cars, but you're not going to see a Porsche, a Mercedes. I haven't seen a Mercedes, a Porsche, a BMW. They're common or garden cars. Our taxi ride in and out of the town centre here is about. It's more than 10 minutes, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And yesterday was on the meter. Normally they don't put it on the meter, but yesterday was on the meter. It was 7.4 RMB, so that's $1. $1 for a taxi ride. So you get an idea of the cost of living when people who are driving you cars are charging you $1 for a one-way fare. So that gives you an indication of how people live out here. Our food, most of our meals have been less than 100 RMB, and we're really eating well. It is quite cheap out here to live, but I guess that there's not a lot of money around. There are shops which have touristy style things, and there are a lot of places where you can just go, and I put this in the video yesterday, you could just go and buy the normal things that normal people in Xinjiang need. In any home you've got lots and lots of that, and a lot less tourist stuff than you would expect to see.
Wow. So you were saying before the show started, this is your 5th time, and you're going again next month for your 6th time to Xinjiang. Yeah. So you've been all over. Is that right? Would you characterize your visitations to Xinjiang as relatively covering most of the?
Not quite. There are some parts of the north I haven't been to. The first time I came to Xinjiang with my father in 2005.
Wow. 2005.
Yeah, he was in his 70s at the time, and he's gone now. But he has great memories of it as well. We've talked about it a couple of times in his last few years. It was very poor back then. If you went to the public toilets near the Da Bazaar, the Grand Bazaar, which is the tourist spot, as you walk in, they hand you a little teapot for washing your bum, stuff like that. There's no such thing as tissues there. It was a very Islamic culture. The bazaar in those days was, really, really. It was like the souk in Turkey. It was very, very rustic, very run down. There were camels outside. People were actually still using camels to deliver things into the marketplace. So it was a kind of different world. That was only 20 years ago. So yeah, very different world. Now there's a high-speed train running in there. The Grand Bazaar is huge. It's beautiful. It's very, very colorful, and it's very touristy. This is one of the things that people like Fernando and I who travel independently in this area, we kind of get a bit annoyed that people who come here, they show the dancing outside of the mosque, they show the musical instruments hanging up in the Grand Bazaar, but they don't show the streets, the real life. And I actually got some video yesterday or the day before of people dancing. It's the first time for me because I try to avoid the cliched stuff, but this one was so unreal. We just walked into a public square and there was a wall with gaps in it. You may have seen the way they dry the fruit. It's brick walls with gaps in them. And I put my camera through the brick wall and there's people dancing in there. I could hear the music. So I just put the camera through and I got people dancing in there. I thought that was quite different, a little catchy rather than a little cliche. Yeah, it's a very different place now to what it was. And there's parts of the north. I was invited to a place called Kucha a few weeks ago and couldn't go because I was on a bike ride. And my wife went on my behalf. I was awarded something because I write a lot about Xinjiang, and I was awarded the ambassador of the Silk Road Friendship. I'm an ambassador of the Silk Road Friendship Award. So that was quite nice. So now I have to say nice things about Xinjiang. Not that it's hard to do that. My job now.
Well, I mean, you made some comparisons. Like in 2005, they rode camels and because they ride camels now, but it's for tourists.
It's a tourist thing to ride a camel.
Yeah.
But this was carrying stock into the bazaar on the back of camels. And I've seen the same thing in parts of Guangdong. You find, particularly in the Nanling Mountains, in the remote areas of Heyuan and Qingyuan, you find horses carrying things around there because it's so much easier than motorbikes or cars can't go up these. Now you've got a road into the town, so a truck can go into the town and deliver things, but there's a store at the top of the hill. How do you get things up to the top of the hill when there's only a kind of a rock path? They put them on the back of horses, so that it's not much different. They're still doing it. They still do it that way here. I was in Qingyuan less than a year ago and got some video of horses going up a hill to deliver stuff to these stores up there. Because that's a tourist zone now. It's been lifted out of poverty. Tourists go there and they stay in this most incredibly beautiful area. And I'll make a video of it and post that on my channel sometime in the future. But I've got all this stock material waiting to just sit down one day and have time to do it.
I noticed that, when China was doing the poverty alleviation campaign, one of the things they did was turn some places into tourist locations.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was to preserve local culture as well, because they're like, okay, you can do your dances and your food and your things for people coming. And then you were helping preserve the culture. At the same time, they're drawing money into that village. You just mentioned the place that you are now is still relatively not well off. It's okay, but it could be better. Do you know of any of the programs that are working there to maybe make things better in the next 10, 15 years?
I haven't talked to anybody here, but what they have done, they've built a massive, and unfortunately it's closed, a massive cultural center, which I wanted to go to, and it's closed. So they're doing some maintenance on it, and it's the end of school holidays. So they've closed it down for a period of time. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, how long it's going to be closed, whether it'll be open before we leave, which is only in 3 days' time. But that's been done. So that will hopefully attract some tourists, because it's a massive cultural center. And it's right across the road. I don't know if many people realize this. The Yuan dynasty, which was the Mongols who came across, they controlled this part of China right the way through till the Ming dynasty. And so Xinjiang, which is, a lot of people who are detractors and critics call it new territories. It's been new since before New York existed and before New Amsterdam, as it was then, or it was called, it was called New Amsterdam first, and New Hampshire, New England, none of those, New Zealand, none of those things existed when this was already called new territory, Xinjiang. And before that, for a period of time, it was known as, and I'm not going to try the Chinese, I've forgotten it, but it was known as Lost Lands Recovered. That was its name. And the Ming dynasty has, from the Forbidden City, lots of paperwork relating to lost lands recovered. And they recovered it from the Yuan dynasty, which was China as well, although it was Mongolian, but it was based in Beijing. So the history of Xinjiang as being part of China goes back a lot longer than Jesus being part of Nazareth. It's really that long. It's further back than that. And so there is a huge mausoleum to Genghis Khan's second son, who died here, and then his family, the Khans. This was known as a Khanate for a period of time, or Khanate. And there's a mausoleum with all of the burial chambers all the way back to the Ming, before the Ming dynasty, but the actual mausoleum was built in the Ming dynasty, and you can go in there and have a look around and see the graves yourself. They need a bit of repair, but it's really quite an interesting history. So there are things that are here to see. There's also part of the city walls, which we're going to see this afternoon after we finished here. My wife and I have already planned to go out there, take some video and just have a look around. But yeah, it's a really interesting place, and you don't see many tourists.
So the mausoleum of Genghis Khan's second son is there.
Second son, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I would love to go see some of this history for myself, because, that does come up in conversations about, the history of that region of China. Let's switch to bicycling for a minute.
Okay.
So you have ridden, okay, I don't even know. Why don't you tell us, how many trips have you taken across China, from where to where, and for what purpose?
Okay.
And could you tell us especially about your first trip? Because I think people are curious, I'm curious, why you started doing this.
I had two real reasons why. One is my mother and her father were both similar body shape to me. I look like my mother. If I grow my hair a little longer and a little less tidy, then you'll see my mother in me. And my grandfather, her father, very, very similar in our body shapes, in our appearances. I am definitely my mother's son, and I am my grandfather's grandson. Both of them had heart conditions in their 50s. And I got out of the shower one day, looked in the mirror and said, I don't want this to happen to me. So I came out of the shower and said to my wife, I'm going to ride to Tibet. I just had this idea. I'll ride a bike to Tibet and just get fit and lose some weight, and that'll be good for me. And of course she says, well, you haven't got a bike, which is a good starting point. So I had to go out and buy a bike. And then we were involved, my wife and I were involved in local fundraising. People say we founded a charity, and that's not true. We founded we kind of created a group from the foreign community inside of Zhongshan, where I live, to raise money for charity. And then it got taken over really by the Chinese community, who got on board and said, this is a great idea. And so I wanted to link the bike ride to the charity, and we got some sponsorship and some money. I was very lucky because I just got a new job with a guy who is a British businessman and a very nice guy, still a good friend today. And this was 2014, and I just started working for him, and I was planning this bike ride. And I said, well, what are we going to do about this? He said, well, my contribution, I'll give you 2 months paid holiday so you can do it. And also I'll sponsor, and he sponsored a few bits and pieces as well. He created a book. You get in the reversal of that, 57 Days Across China. This is sponsored by, his company name was called Star Prototype, then it's called Star Rapid now. So he published that book for us, and we got several thousand copies, which we sold for charity. We've got a couple more copies still left, but we've never sold it. It doesn't have an ISBN, so we've never sold it. It was just sold at charity events, and we raised a few $100,000 RMB. The following year, my wife decided that she wanted to go one better. She said, I didn't feel like I could stand tall next to my husband. So she said she wanted to do something better, and she walked to Beijing from Zhongshan and actually did better. She raised more money than we raised. So between us, between our activities, we've raised about 4 million RMB for local disabled charities. Which is, it's not a lot, it's $500,000 US. But in a country that's still developing, that's pretty good. So that was the first bike ride. I rode from the border of Macau, and I went all the way across to the border of Kazakhstan, which is a place I was in again last week, for interesting, and that's changed a lot. So we were in actually the same border crossing that we went to back in 2014. I was there again last week for the first time. And then 2 years later, I was working in Harbin, and rather than get a flight home, I spent 42 days riding home with a friend who flew to Harbin to join me for the ride home. That was the second one. The third one was my wife and I, with the same friend, we flew to Urumqi in Xinjiang and then rode back. And that was also to raise money for charity, which again we did. And then my wife and I took a trip, just the two of us, through Guangxi, and we went for 7 weeks just traveling. That was a holiday. And the most recent one was, so it's 5 real trips across China, but the most recent one was from Zhongshan to Inner Mongolia, which is about a little under 3,000 kilometers. And we took our time with that one. It took 40-something days.
And you've also rode in Xinjiang as well, where you are now. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had to ride across it to get to the border.
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah. So you also mentioned earlier that this is your 5th trip. So what cities, what localities, what prefectures have you been to in Xinjiang itself?
Okay, well, on the trip riding, we enter through a town called Xinjiang. So anyone who knows anything about the geography, the border of Gansu, there's a road goes all the way through Gansu. Gansu is a very strange, it's a very long, it's an L shape, it's a very long province. And we went into Gansu, up the bottom end of it, into Ningxia, and then across back into Gansu again. So we were in Gansu, Ningxia, then Gansu. And we rode all the way down on the G312, where you pass through cities like Jiayuguan, which is the end of the Great Wall, and some famous cities. Donghuan is there as well. Although we went to Yumen, which is about 50, 60 kilometers from Donghuan. We didn't actually go to Donghuan on either of the trips that we traveled through. Then when you enter into Xinjiang, the first city you arrive in is Hami. The second one is Turufan or Turpan, and the third one is Wulumuchi or Urumqi. And then you go west from there through Bortola, Borla, Korgash. We went into Ili, which was out of the way, and then back up to Korgash to reach the border. So that was that trip. The second trip was from Urumqi. We flew in and then rode out. And we used a slightly different route, but we still have to go through Turpan and Hami to get out of Xinjiang. On this trip, I've been to Kashgar, I've been to Borla, Bortola. I was in Shibo, which is a really interesting place that I'm going to write an article about, because we had in there, I'll show you, wait, give me one moment, I'm sure I have it in here. Yeah. This is something that is quite unique. This is, it looks like Mongolian writing. It's not.
I thought it was. It's not.
Yeah, most people look at that think it's Mongolian, and it's not. It's a language that is understood in the far west of Xinjiang and the far east of Dongbei. Shenyang and Xinjiang have a common language. Now
What?
you're looking confused. How did
Yeah,
that
I am
happen?
confused.
They have the same language,
It's like
and it looks like
3,000
Mongolian.
kilometers apart.
Correct, yeah. So this all happened in the 1400s, 1450, 1460, something like that. I'll get the exact date before I'll do some research before I start writing. But the exact date escapes me. It's in the 1400s. 4,000 people from Shenyang walked to Shibo to protect the western borders of the country for the Qing dynasty. As the Qing dynasty was forming, then because it took over from the Ming dynasty, the Qing dynasty was Manchu, and Shenyang and that area was where the Manchus came from. But they were heavily influenced by Mongolians because Dongbei, the northeast of China, is very close to Mongolia and Inner Mongolia, but back in those days they were all Mongolians. So they've influenced the language and the writing, which is different, but to me it looks the same, and to you obviously too. So they then walked all the way across to protect the western borders, and they based themselves very close to what is now Ely, and that was the capital city of the region, the province of that area. Now, when you say, why would you put the capital city so far west? That's right near the border. No, the border wasn't there. It was way out in Kazakhstan, way beyond this border. So the border of China was much further out, and they've conceded some of that land now to create the new borders, which they created several hundred years ago, a couple of hundred years ago. So, all this myth about, Xinjiang, new territories, it's been taken over, and that's why they call it new. No, it's not. It's a lot newer than the new territories of Hong Kong, and it's a lot newer than New York. It's a lot newer than New Zealand, New Caledonia, or any of the other colonial news.
You mean older?
A lot older.
Yeah. That's remarkable. I'm looking forward to your article. Please send me a link. Because I reposted that you were sharing that, and I just assumed, because I just took a glance at the newspaper, I was like, oh, he's just showing that Mongolian script is alive and well in China, which I've seen myself. So I reposted it, and little did I know that there's a much more complicated story to that script.
Not actually a Mongolian probably wouldn't be able to read it. So some Mongolians would look at it. It's probably like me reading Portuguese. There'll be words in there that I know, but could I read it? Not really.
Wow. Well, let's talk about Xinjiang. Well, actually, let's go back. So in Xinjiang, there's a lot of minority groups, right? Could you tell me a little bit about some of the minority groups that you've encountered or learned about while you're there?
Okay, Xinjiang has pretty much all of the ethnic minorities, but in some areas they are autonomous. We were just recently in I think it's Bortola or Bola, I can't remember which one, is a Mongolian autonomous region. You say, well, how come this area is Mongolian? And it's because of the Yuan dynasty. They came over here, they controlled this area, and they've remained here. They're still here, and they're Chinese Mongolians. And they speak, read, and write Mongolian. And it's not this language, it's Mongolian, proper Mongolian. Then you go out a little further. We were in a Kazakh autonomous region. Now, this is something many people don't realize. The autonomous regions far exceed the amount of ethnic minorities that there are. So there are 55 minorities, 56 ethnicities in China, with Han being the largest and 55 smaller. They take up something like 12% of the population of China. But it used to be 11, so it's growing. So there's another myth debunked. The population of minorities has grown faster than the population of Han. So there is that. Then the areas where they live in their predominance, if they are, so for example, in Ningxia is not a province. Most of the people who live there are Hui Muslims. So Ningxia is a Hui autonomous region. Xinjiang is a Uyghur autonomous region because most of the people who live here, the majority of the people, and it's only about 51 or 52%, but the majority of people who live in Xinjiang are Uyghurs. Now, let's put this into some perspective, because inside of Xinjiang, which is a Uyghur province, let's simplify things and call it a province. It's actually a region, but if we simplify it and call it a province, inside of here are counties that belong to Tajiks, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and Mongolians and Tibetans, all inside of this one region, which is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So that's why this area, people call it a province, and they're wrong, but I understand why. It's quite confusing when you have 22 provinces and then you have 5 autonomous regions, which effectively work the same way. They are effectively governed like a province, but they're governed by minority people. In this country, 67% of the land is autonomously controlled. Only 12% of the people are the people who control that land. Now,
Wow.
admittedly, a lot of that land is desert or grasslands, and it is basically not populated. But that's a fact. 67% of China is controlled by the ethnic minorities of China. That's really interesting to find out.
That is really interesting. I was in the north of Xinjiang, I don't know, 3 months ago, and I encountered another group I'd never heard of before. And they are a subset, maybe you know them, Tuvan, but they're a subset of the Mongolian that had also have their own story of
Right.
migrating from Mongolia. And they settled in a different place, and they've been there for like hundreds of years. And they have their own separate subset of Mongolian ethnic group called Tuvan. And I was,
Yep.
I'd never heard of them until I went to the village where they were like, this is our village.
Yeah, and they run it as an autonomous region. Yeah. No,
So,
I
okay.
don't know. There are 55 of them, and honestly, I don't know them all. I've met up with lots of them. We were in Yunnan last year, and we met a lady who told us that she was a member of the 55th. There are only 60,000 of them alive, and she was the 55th recognized ethnicity. So they're the smallest group, and they'd only recently been recognized, not recently, but it, since the founding of the People's Republic of China. And that's
So
where
they're
the
smaller
autonomous
than.
regions came in as well. Tibet has just celebrated its 60th year as an autonomous region, and Xi Jinping went there. And talk about I mean, Mike Pompeo posted how they're destroying the culture and showed a picture of him arriving there in the culture and the colors with the scarf and all the people dressed up. Destroyed culture? Come on. So, yeah, it kind of beggars belief that they can even post this stuff without a sense of irony. Yes, Xinjiang is 70 years now as an autonomous region. It was granted autonomy quite quickly, and a part of that was because, believe it or not, the Uyghur military helped helped to overthrow the KMT. They helped the party to overthrow the KMT, and they got recognition for that by having their own autonomous region. And I mean, there are probably, I don't know if this definitely, but there are probably some people who don't like China in this region, but it's very hard to find them. I got a video of a guy yesterday. He said, "Where are you from?" So as soon as I answered, I clicked the thing on. I was holding the camera in my hand. I clicked it on. I said, "I'm in Australia. What's your Audalia-ren, Nishanali-ren?" And he says, "What's your Jongo-ren?" with a big smile. He's Chinese. That's how he looks at it. He's definitely not Chinese looking. He's ethnically a Uyghur. He actually came from Urumqi, he told me afterwards. But he's here working.
Okay, so you've been through a lot of cities. Do you see mosques during your travels? Are they there, or have they all been demolished, Jerry?
No, there's plenty of mosques. I don't know where all this demolished comes from. There are plenty of mosques. The fact is, particularly in places like Ningxia, they're on every second corner. You literally can't ride through Ningxia without going, wow, look, there's another one, and they all look amazing. They're the most beautiful buildings that you can see. They're everywhere, and in the rural areas, they're the building that stands out. In the cities, maybe you don't see them so clearly. A lot of them are in local design, architecture, and I think that's one of the criticisms. But when you think about it, why should they build these great big domes in a place where you don't have the wood? There's not many trees in the desert, so you're going to build a mosque and you're going to build it as square as you can using what resources you have. So they're built in local architecture a lot more. So they don't all jump out and bite you. I was absolutely, I'm going to use the word gobsmacked in Tibet last year. I took a walk through Lhasa on my own, no guides, no minders, and I just took a 4 or 5 hour walk. I walked 16,000 steps that day, just mostly walking through Lhasa, and I kind of bumped into two different mosques, and I got video evidence of this, and I was like, wow. I didn't even know there were Muslims in Tibet. Nobody had ever told me this before. And there I was in one part of it was a Uyghur area, and another part was a Hui area, and they each have their own mosque. They have different mosques, and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize this at all. I was also in Kashgar a few months ago with a Muslim friend. He's a professor, from Sweden, but he's a Muslim, and he went to the mosque to pray. So it's just normal. If you want to go to pray, you go to pray. If you don't want to go to pray, you don't pray. Simple.
You know, your story about Lhasa reminds me of going to Barkhor Street because I didn't know that either. I'm like in Barkhor Streets, they call it the heart of Lhasa. And I was walking around it, and I saw this mosque. It says the Grand Mosque, and I was like, "What?"
Same area.
Like, totally shocked, very surprised. Like it's everywhere in China. There's like different minority groups and different religions, and it's a way different than people who have not been to China very much imagine. I think.
Yeah, true. In the city of Urumqi, it's a little harder to spot the mosques because they're just built normal buildings. They may have an ornate door. It's a little bit harder to spot them. But, it's probably a little like in some places in Europe, you can't see the churches. They're just normal buildings. Presbyterian churches are just normal buildings. And they don't do anything flash or fancy with them. But they've usually got some indicator with the crescent moon and things like that on the doorway. They are a little harder to see. But I was told there are 24,000 mosques in China. And I would believe that because I've seen a lot of them. I was actually in that book that I just showed you. There are pictures of mosques in here.
I just anyone who comes to China, even Shanghai or Beijing, I just would like to tell them just open your Didi, type in mosque in English or in Chinese, and there's going to be dots all over your phone, like all over the map.
2014. There's one under construction. Yeah, a mosque under construction, and it's in Middle Eastern style too. So yeah, that mosque is now fully functioning and very large mosque, and I think that's in Gansu, not in Xinjiang, but northwest China anyway.
Well, you mentioned all kinds of ethnic groups, so obviously you're meeting real people from various backgrounds. Could you tell us about some of the Uyghurs that you've encountered? Have you made friends? Have you had dinner with, or lunch, or coffee, tea, or whatever? What have been some of your encounters with Uyghur people been like in any of these trips?
Well, it's the same as when I was a European. I lived in the UK, and I would travel to Spain, and I would go into a bar, a restaurant, a coffee shop, whatever, and I would meet Spanish people, and you'd have a kind of broken conversation with them. It's no different to that. You're made to feel very welcome. They want you to try their local stuff. They're always encouraging, have a try of this, have a try of that. I had a cup of coffee inside of a naan bread. They kind of shape the bread into a pot.
Wow.
And you drink it and then you eat the bread. And
Wow.
again, it's something unusual that they've decided to do locally here. I have to say it wasn't, coffee was okay. The naan bread with tasting coffee was a bit odd. Bread dipped in coffee. It's not my favorite, but we meet
Biscotti's okay.
Yeah, the coffee was great. When you go into any shop in this town we're in now, I think it's 93% Uyghur. Somebody told me that yesterday at breakfast. It's 93%. So when you go into any shop, you go into the hotel here, all the reception staff, all the kitchen staff, the cleaning staff, the housekeeping, they're all Uyghur. Every single person here is a Uyghur. There is no concept of any distrust, distaste, dislike. It's welcoming. They realize that, I think probably they realize that we're bringing money in. We may get charged a tourist tax when we want to buy something. We got a taxi the other day. He didn't put the meter on and he charged us 14 RMB, and he probably thought he'd ripped us off, and we thought, oh, $2 for a taxi ride is not a lot of money. It's a 15-minute taxi ride. It wasn't a big deal to us to get ripped off like that. It's a money transfer. It's taking the wealth from me to this side here. So if he thought he'd ripped us off, I'm okay with that, and that kind of thing. But even so, he was a friendly taxi driver. He was putting his music on, and it's all Uyghur music, and you can't help but move. You find yourself doing this to the Uyghur music. It is that kind of music. Chinese music is a lot of ballads. There's a lot of kind of gentle love songs, and Uyghur music is dance music. I can see why they do it. I'm not a big fan of the Uyghur dancing videos. I find them a bit cliche. But you can't avoid them. People are doing it all the time in this region. My interactions with them have all been positive, basically 100% positive.
I went to, you keep mentioning dancing. So my first night in Kashgar 3 years ago, I wanted to get away from where everyone else was going. I was big media crew, and I was like, oh, you guys are all going here. Great. I'll stay with you for a while. Then I'm going to my own place because I want to see it for myself and decide where I'm going. So I left the main group and I went to the People's Square, which is like a big square, just like a big square. And so I went there, and there must have been 1,000 people in the square dancing, but they weren't all dancing together. It was like damas, so you have big groups of people dancing together, and there were like 50 individual pockets of dancing groups with stereos, and each one had their own like style, and some of them were wearing uniforms, and some of them like were Uyghurs, and some of them were Hui, and some of them were Han, and it was just really amazing to me that you just have like 1,000 people on any given night out in the streets just dancing, and you could hear the overlapping music coming from different directions.
Yeah,
I thought it was beautiful. Personally, I thought it was just like amazing. Not just like yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was in Hohhot, Inner Mongolia, a few weeks ago, and we were in the local square. As you say, there's a lot of people dancing there, and I've got some video imagery of this. But what struck me was a couple, an elderly couple. They were both my age, 60, 70, something like that. And they were both dancing Uyghur-style dancing, and they had a group of kids, not kids, younger people, 20s and 30s, playing the drums and the tambourine and I realized what was going on. These two were dancing, but they were a drum school. They were teaching percussion. And so at the end of it, so when class was over, they all kind of had a little chat and then dismissed themselves and off they went. And I thought that was unusual because there we were in Inner Mongolia, and we're watching Uyghur dancing. So that's another thing. The assimilation of the different cultures and the different ethnicities really does exist. People in China are very interested in learning more about people who have a different ethnicity. I've never yet met anyone who's kind of mumbled and said, I'm not Han Chinese. They usually, do you know I'm not Han Chinese? I'm a Mongolian. Well, the first time I came across this was a girl that I'm still friendly with who worked in the same company that I was going to work for with that English guy. And she's his personal assistant. English is superb, brilliant English. And the first time I met her, she said, can you guess where I come from? China? She said, yeah, but what part of China? No, I can't. I'm sorry. She said, I'm Mongolian. Oh, really? Are you from Mongolia? I said, no, I'm in a Mongolia. She's from Baotou. And she's a Mongolian and working in Guangdong. And she's so proud of this fact. There was nothing to be afraid of. And people say this to you all the time. You get introduced to someone and they'll say, I'm not Han Chinese. They're more proud that they are. And then the Han Chinese sometimes have a little resentment because they get special treatment in university rankings and things like that. So there is a little kind of, not tension, but there's a little kind of envy there, because if you're a minority, you have every right to be proud of that, but at the same time, you get some advantage for being so.
Yeah, that reminds me. I have so many other stories. I do want to ask you, because this is something I am curious about. Police checkpoints, and I'm not just curious about police checkpoints. I'm curious about what they think of some Lawai, a foreigner, riding a bicycle through the desert who suddenly encounters a police checkpoint. Did they think you were crazy? I mean, how did that go?
Yeah, you get a lot of people saying, "What are you doing?" "Oh, we're riding to Guangdong." "On that?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Well, we're doing this for charity." "Oh, can we have do you want some fruit? Here's a bowl of fruit. Let me top up your water for you." And they're always bringing there's a bottle of water being offered to. We go through. There are a lot of checkpoints in Xinjiang. It's an inevitability because it's had a lot of terrorism in the past. It's had no terrorist incident, I think, for 10 years now. When I first started paying attention, it was 4.5 years, and that's about 5 years. So we're coming up, if not at it, we're around the 10-year mark without any terrorist incident. So that's a good thing. Then when we arrive there, we have to go through the manual side. There's an automatic side, so most people just put their ID card onto a card reader, get their face scanned, and they're through, and it takes seconds. If there's only 2 people in the car goes straight through. It gets read. If they're in the back seat, they have to get out. But if they're in the front seat, two people they scanned and gone. It just takes seconds. They know who they are, they know what they're doing, everybody's moving, and as long as you're not breaking any laws, as long as you're not a terrorist, then you won't have a problem. Now, the first time we rode out of Urumqi, now coming into China in 2014, they didn't have the checkpoints. A lot of security, but no checkpoints. In 2019, when we rode out of Urumqi, we rode out of the city, and pretty close, you leave the city and you're in the desert. It's like 2 hours out of the city on a bike. You're in treeless mountains. It's quite hilly, and there's no trees or very few trees. And so you're pretty much in the desert, or you're certainly in a very arid zone. And we rode out of the city, and we along this road, and we saw this thing, and all the cars were being diverted in. So I was in the front. There was three of us riding along. I'm in the front. And I thought, oh, well, we don't need to stop there as a checkpoint. And I just rode. And then I hear this, and there's a guy with a machine gun pointing it at me. And I better stop. So we stopped and we did a U-turn and we went in. So sorry, didn't know we had to stop. And they were all right. We had several of these places. We had photo ops with the staff there. And we've actually had that photo of us with the security published in Chinese media, but with the faces blurred out. Not ours. They blurred out the police officers' faces, where they give us bowls of fruit and they give us water, and they're really nice. But it's a process you have to go to. You've got to go into the building. You've got to go through the process. They manually record everything, and then they let you go. And when you're on a bike ride that takes 8 hours to go 110 kilometers, it's a bit of an inconvenience stopping 3 times to be checked. That's the only issue I ever had with it. There was never any issues. There was never any tensions or anything like that. They were all very, very nice. And there was a lot of curiosity about what we were doing. On the first ride, I had a card made up which explained in Chinese what we were doing, because it was just too difficult for me to explain in my broken Chinese. So I just had a card made up, and we just handed that to people who asked us, this is what we're doing. And because we did that, some people would come and give us money, because we're collecting money for that. Oh, we don't want your money. We didn't want cash. But when they did that, if anyone gave me money, I would WeChat a donation into because both of the two of us who were riding, we actually covered our own costs. We didn't take that from the donations that were made. We covered all of our own costs. I was lucky enough to be on salary at the time, and the other guy wasn't. But we didn't make money out of this. And when we did get a gift given to us, we would make a donation into the charity fund. So that was the only way we could do it kind of legitimately.
That sounds lovely, and it's a very interesting story. But you just mentioned riding out of Urumqi into the desert.
Yeah.
Did you cross the Taklamakan Desert by bicycle?
There's different parts of the Taklamakan. Yes, we did. We crossed it, but we
Really?
didn't cross it. Yeah, if you're crossing from north to south, it's pretty dangerous. If you're crossing it from east to west, there are good roads. There's train lines across there now as well. So crossing it from east to west, you're on a road. There's very little in the way of danger. We stopped at a place and filled up with water. Basically, we had these 1.5 liter water bottles, the ones that have the hook on the top.
Yeah.
We had one of those on each side of the handlebars, and we went into the desert, because you've got about 300 kilometers of desert before you hit Turpan, the next major city. Yeah, so
My wife was just there 2 months ago by car, and she said she was just like casually crossing the desert, and a sandstorm hit, and she couldn't move for like 12 hours. Were you worried about a sandstorm hitting?
Well, you kind of, you don't, no, not worried. You just put it out of your mind. When we were in Turpan in 2014, we were ready to leave, and the hotel, we were in a hostel at the time, the White Camel Hostel. I don't know if it still exists in Turban. It's a great little place to stay, though. And the owner of the hostel said to us, you shouldn't go today. There's a forecast of a storm. And so we said, okay, because he knew that when we left there, we would be camping overnight. He said, you don't want to be camping in a sandstorm. Okay, fair enough. So we'll take your local knowledge, and we stayed an extra night. Our bikes were in the reception of the area. When we came out in the morning, the seat was completely covered in dust, and I wrote "Clean me" on the saddle of my bike in the dust. And that was inside. So yeah, we went outside, and you see people sweeping up like 2 inches of dust. You don't want to be in it. I haven't personally experienced it, but apparently we had one here 2 nights ago. I didn't know about it. I was in
Wow.
bed. Happened overnight, and yeah, it's a bit. It was everything's dusty here. Yeah, but it
Well,
didn't bother us. It wasn't something we were going to stop and not go. Uh, on these roads, you have a lot of culverts underneath the road for flood. There's no drainage at all, so when it floods, they have to take the water away, and it just goes under the road in these culverts. And so we slept in there a couple of times, and if something bad had have happened, now the wind is vicious in those areas. I mean, it's hot. 45 degrees centigrade is like riding through a massive hairdryer. If you can imagine what a hairdryer feels like when it's all encompassing, that's basically what it was. So yeah, there was some risk there, but the risk was mitigated or minimized. And there's always lots of trucks going up and down that road, so it's not like at one stage we were very low on water, and my wife just knocked on a truck door. He's having a sleep the side of the road, and you could see him waking up, and she knocked on the door and said, "Have you got any spare water?" Yeah, yeah, 3 bottles for you. There you go. And no, we wouldn't want to take any money. Would have been insulted if we'd offered it as well. But yeah, that's what people do in that region. They know how difficult it is. It's a tough ride, but it's very satisfying. I mean, you sleep at night, it's freezing cold, but if you look up in the sky, you have no idea how many stars there are until you've been in places like this.
wow, you made me want to do it, and then you've also made me not want to do it because
Yeah, but you
the
only ride
stars
2 hours
thing.
and it hurts.
The star, yeah. Well, I have to build up to it, but the stars
Got to
thing
start.
sounds incredible. However, riding through a giant hot hair dryer does not sound wonderful. I was in a bus and we had air conditioning, and I was uncomfortable. We crossed the Taklamakan Desert, so being outside in the elements sounds really tough. Can we talk about your bicycle for a moment? When
Sure.
you don't have media or a car following you, which is, I guess, most of the time.
We never
How
had
do you
media or car following us. The
never?
trip that we did to Hohhot, they met us in each of the cities. They weren't following us. So we've
So
never had a support vehicle.
when you are far from civilization and there's nothing but little villages or nothing, and do you ever worried about the mechanics of your bike? What kind of spare parts do you bring? How do you prepare for the possibility that something might go wrong?
Yeah, you carry a lot of spares. You carry the tools that you need to fix them. We try and standardize the bikes. When there's three of us there riding together, we like to have three bikes exactly the same. So we carry a lot of spare tubes for the tires. We carried a spare tire most of the time, but the only time I didn't carry a spare tire, I needed one. And I had a blowout where we ended up walking 5 or 6 kilometers back to the town we'd been in. We'd had lunch, ridden out, 10 or 15 minutes in, 5 or 6 kilometers away, and then bang, my tire just blew up. It exploded. I'm not sure what had happened to that. It was a pretty hot day. Maybe something weakened in the tire wall. I don't know. The tire was not made in China. That's a different story. So we walked back, and then we kind of found, because the village had no bike shop or anything, and I was unable to ride. So what we did there was we got a bread van, Mianbaoche, and got that van to take us to the next town, which is 60 kilometers away. That's something you can do when all else fails. But a lot of the time you make do. I had a broken rack, and we fixed it with lollipop sticks and cable ties to get to the.
Is that? Did you just make that up?
No, we actually did that. Cable ties, and we found a paddle pop stick, lollipop stick, and a few cable ties and a couple of twigs to hold everything together, and got into the next town. And there was
Wow.
one case where again a failure in the rack, where we left all of my stuff in a culvert under the road in the middle of the desert, and we rode to the next town, and then we rented a car to drive back and pick it up and then take it back. And then this was outside of Turpan, actually. So we were about 80 kilometers from town, so we just rode into town and got a car to bring us back. So I couldn't carry anything, and I didn't want to impose on the other two, can you carry each of my bags? Because that means I'm riding with no weight and they're riding with extra weight. And it's hard enough as it is without imposing on your co-riders. So yeah, we've had a couple of little issues, but generally speaking, most of the stuff you can repair yourself. Bikes are fairly simple machines. If the gearing goes wrong, you're in trouble. You might not be able to change gear, but you can usually work out something. Even if it means getting off, changing gear, and then getting back on. And I had some problems in the middle of China. I was in Hubei, I think, or maybe, yeah, probably it was in Hubei, where my crank was really, really playing up and skipping. So I got that fixed just right into the next town. You limp in to the next town and get it fixed. So that's how it works. You can't carry spare everything, so you just do what you can. If a cable breaks, you do without that cable till you get to the next place. That's how it works.
We don't have a lot of time, just a couple of minutes. What would you like people to know about Xinjiang that you think is misunderstood?
Everything. Simple as that.
Everything.
If your source of media is Western media, then pretty much everything you have ever known about Xinjiang is a misunderstanding. It's as simple as that. You really need, and the one thing that is the redeeming factor is that organizations like the BBC will often say Xinjiang is very difficult to get to. And what they're trying to imply is that you need special permissions or something like that. It's not very difficult to get to. You can come to Xinjiang anytime you want and go almost anywhere. Now, there are some border control areas that you can't go into. And the reason for that is because they border places like, and a lot of people don't realize this, Afghanistan, Pakistan. These are places that have terrorism issues that China doesn't have at the moment. They have issues with security, so they don't let anyone in there unless they have a reason to go there. So there are a couple of off-limit regions. But generally speaking, if you want to go to Xinjiang, come to China legitimately. So you have a visa, or you don't have a visa, you're visa-free. And if you come into China, then you can legally visit all of Xinjiang, all of the cities in Xinjiang. But there's some areas outside of each city that they might say you can't go into that area. So that's the big thing. It's not difficult to get to. You don't need special permission. If you are legitimately in China, you are legitimately allowed to travel anywhere inside of Xinjiang. And you can come by train, by plane, by car. You can't come by boat. There's no way to get in by boat. That's probably the only issue.
Well, I'm gonna look for some kind of river now.
They have rivers here. Actually, this city has a very large river. We crossed over it we flew in from Kashgar, which is only 200 kilometers away. The shortest flight I've ever had. I've flown to Edinburgh, which took longer from London, but this was a really short flight. But somebody else paid for it, so we flew into here, and there's beautiful river running through the town. Although I haven't seen it from the ground yet. That's this afternoon's trip.
Thank you so much for your time. Those amazing stories. Thank you again. I hope we can get you back on the show again in the future. Jerry Gray.
Anytime, Jason. Thank you very much, and thanks to all your listeners.